To say that the 2020 AFL season was unlike any other would be an understatement. At the cusp of the beginning of the season, a global pandemic took hold like few could have predicted. Within a matter of days, conversations went from whether the season would be effective at all, to whether or not we'd have crowds, to whether or not we'd get a season in at all. Through all the uncertainty that was happening all over the world at the time, the AFL pushed ahead with round one on the compromise that we would play the first round behind closed doors with no crowds. The season kicked off in eerie circumstances, with the Tigers and Blues kicking off the usual season opener with a completely silent and empty stadium. The opening round saw Collingwood make the biggest statement of that week, belting the Bulldogs by 54 points at Marvel Stadium, but by Sunday of that weekend, the mood around the league had changed entirely. Due to the quickly developing coronavirus situation that was happening around the world, Gillon McLachlan and the AFL announced that at the conclusion of round one, the season would be postponed until the end of May. After a long off-season and the build-up and anticipation of season 2020, and the fact that the whole COVID situation had evolved quite rapidly, this really left AFL fans across the country with a severe case of blue balls. There would be roughly 3 months of no football, with state leagues around the country postponed and the AFLW season cancelled altogether. But somehow we got through it, although the league did have to further compromise the season to ensure that we got through it all. Specifically, it would be shortened to an 18-round season, down from the usual 23, and each team would play each other just the once. The season would need to be compressed into, at times, multiple rounds per week, with shortened quarters also being necessary to accommodate the extra strain on the players. As a result of all the financial strain due to no crowds, the AFL also had to negotiate a significant salary reduction to the players and staff. Additionally, the early parts of the season would be required to be played in quarantine hubs so as to avoid interstate travel, which meant the West Australian and South Australian teams had to head to Queensland for a 5-week stay, playing each other at neutral venues. The 10 Victorian teams would stay in Victoria and play against each other in the same way. The season would then resume in early June in somewhat unspectacular fashion, with Collingwood and Richmond doing battle at the MCG, which ended in a disappointing draw in which both sides clearly lacked match fitness. Given that these two sides were considered major players in the 2020 Premiership race, this game received a lot of backlash for its poor standard of play. The next biggest story of round two would be Gold Coast's shock belting of the West Coast Eagles at Metricon Stadium. Having arrived on the Gold Coast to enjoy a 5-week stay with their fresh, shiny new recruit Tim Kelly, the Eagles got handed a footballing lesson by the Gold Coast Suns and Matthew Rowell. The Suns then made it 2 in a row by belting the struggling Adelaide Crows the following week, and Matthew Rowell was the talk of the town with back-to-back 3-vote Brownlow performances. Suddenly, the Suns were talked up as a finals aspirant, while a little further south, Carlton pulled off the unthinkable by beating Geelong at GMHBA Stadium. Round 3 demonstrated that we weren't quite out of the woods with regards to COVID-19, with Essendon's Connor McKenna testing positive to the virus and forcing a postponement of their round 3 clash with Melbourne. To then add uncertainty to the situation, he then returned 2 negative tests in the ensuing days. The league had put protocols in place, McKenna would be forced to isolate away from his teammates, and thus the season was allowed to continue. Round 4 saw a devastating blow to Collingwood's season, as Jeremy Howe's year came to an abrupt end in an injury in their loss to the Giants in Sydney. The Eagles' Queensland hub misery continued as they got absolutely belted by the Power, while Richmond looked equally sluggish, with 2 losses and a draw coming back after the restart. Sadly, round 5 saw the end of the Matthew Rowell show. The young superstar's season would be cut short, sustaining a brutal shoulder injury against the Cats in Geelong, and sadly, one of this season's most intriguing side stories came to an end. As the coronavirus situation continued to develop in Victoria, unfortunately, the 2020 season was increasingly under threat. Due to explosive infection rates throughout the state of Victoria, the AFL were forced to withdraw from the state entirely. This meant that all 10 Victorian clubs had to move to different states to hub for the foreseeable future. Queensland was the logical destination for a number of clubs, but a handful also went to Sydney, Adelaide, and Perth as well. It was this point of the season where the integrity and fairness of the season came under serious threat. We were potentially looking at a season where all Victorian clubs would lose the benefit of home games and be forced to play in a foreign environment for the rest of the season. On top of that, due to the compressed nature of the season, we saw some clubs have to play in as many as 3 states in a short period of time. But for the time being, it was the best we got, and the sacrifices being made by the players and staff on substantially reduced salaries was significant. Round 7 would bring one of the best finishes of the entire season. The Blues were hosting the Power at the Gabba, and the two sides engaged in a skillful, engaging encounter from start to finish. The Blues managed to wrangle the lead with less than a minute remaining before Robbie Gray fulfilled every kid's childhood dream by kicking an amazing set shot after the siren to win the game for the Power. The Power were enjoying an amazing run of form and managed to top the ladder at the end of every round to this point of the season. Meanwhile, the Saints were enjoying their own rise up the ladder under Brett Ratton, which truly caught everyone's attention when just a week later they managed to knock off the Power on their home deck by 5 goals. AFL. The winless Crows came agonisingly close to their first win of the season, falling 3 points short of Essendon, while the Eagles returned to flag favouritism with wins over Geelong and Collingwood back in Perth. The sleeping giants of the competition, Richmond, managed to shake off some of their own lethargic form with wins over North Melbourne and the Bulldogs, while the Lions flexed some of their own muscle by absolutely massacring Essendon. After a horror season in 2019, much interest would be placed upon Melbourne's response in 2020. To this point of the season, Melbourne had been the definition of inconsistency. This would be best exemplified by their huge loss to the Power in the middle of the season, which they then followed with 3 consecutive 50-point wins. Christian Petrarca's ascension to being an absolute superstar of the competition was the main storyline for Melbourne in 2020, although the up and down nature of their results would undoubtedly be frustrating to their fans. The Blues, similarly, were having an up and down season under coach David Teague. The Blues conceded a 30-point swing as they lost to the Hawks in Perth. The Blues, naturally being a young side, were always going to be inconsistent to some extent, but the remarkable nature of this stat undoubtedly would be a cause for concern for Blues fans. Round 11 saw a significant clash of the Titans as the travelling Tigers took on Port Adelaide at Adelaide Oval. For the Power, this was a huge opportunity for them to prove themselves as genuine contenders for the flag, despite the fact that they had led the ladder at every point this season. It was an absorbing battle, the Power proved too strong, and they appeared to announce themselves as one of the best teams of the competition. 1 week later, however, that perception was immediately rocked. Fresh off their success, the Power had to travel to Queensland to take on Geelong and were mercilessly thumped. A bad day at the office, or something more sinister, it remained to be seen. In the same round, Carlton would then travel to Perth to take on the Fremantle Dockers. It would be a dour, low-scoring affair for most of the night, although it finished with arguably the best climax of any game this season. Carlton would controversially be paid a downfield free kick after the siren, which left Jack Nunes lining up for goal to win the game in a similar position to Robbie Gray had done to them a few weeks previous. Amidst a booing, albeit diminished home crowd, Jack Nunes went back and slotted one of the best set shots of the entire season to break Fremantle hearts 2 years in a row. On a positive note for Fremantle, however, they would continue their slow and steady development under new coach Justin Longmuir. The development of young guns such as Andy Brayshaw, Adam Cerra and Caleb Sarong was clearly on show the following week when they absolutely thumped Sydney. In round 15, we saw the Lions overcome a desperate Collingwood side to surge into second spot, but it came at a cost, with star defender Harris Andrews picking up a hamstring injury that would threaten his season. Round 15 saw Adelaide notch their first win of the season as they shocked the Hawks at Adelaide Oval, and this would spark a hat-trick of wins to really take the pressure off new coach Matthew Nicks. Round 17 would mark a significant point of the season, a potential grand final preview between Geelong and Richmond at Metricon Stadium. With top 4 positions for both of these sides far from locked up, this game had serious ladder implications. On this occasion, it would be the Tigers who landed the knockout blow, as the Cats without Gary Rowan were far too predictable going forward. The Tigers were able to clamp down on Tom Hawkins, who to that point was having a career-best season and was arguably the league's MVP. In typical fashion, Richmond were timing their season to perfection. In the final round of the home and away season, the Saints were able to put away a disappointing Giants side to secure their spot in the finals. The Cats snuck into the top 4 with an unconvincing win over the struggling Swans, while the Power sealed top spot with a win over Collingwood. So, at the end of the home and away season, this is how the top 8 shaped up. The Power would obviously finish top of the ladder, a position they didn't give up for the entire season, while the Lions secured top 2 for the second year running. The reigning champions would finish 3rd, while Geelong would finish 4th despite having the best percentage of any team. The Eagles and Saints earned home finals, finishing 5th and 6th respectively, while the Bulldogs and Collingwood would round out 2020's finalists. This would set up one of the best first weeks of finals we've probably ever seen. It opened with a gripping contest between the Power and the Cats, in which the home team proved too strong. In what seemed like one of the most significant results of the entire season, Brisbane managed to snap their hoodoo against the Richmond Tigers to surge into a home prelim. The Saints managed to celebrate their first finals game in nearly a decade with a win over the Bulldogs, while Collingwood broke Eagles' hearts in a typically heart-stopping game in Perth. Week 2 was comparatively less exciting, with Richmond doing away with St Kilda with relative ease and Geelong absolutely dismantling a disappointing Collingwood. The margin never stretched beyond 11 points either way between the Power and the Tigers, with the reigning champs just getting the better of Port Adelaide by 6 points. The Tigers had sealed their appearance in their 3rd grand final in 4 years and had a chance to go back-to-back. Their opponents would be the Geelong Cats, who brushed aside a surprisingly meek Brisbane Lions outfit at the Gabba. With the grand final of course being held at the Gabba the following week, this seemed like a massive missed opportunity for the home side. In some consolation for the Brisbane Lions, champion on bowler Lachie Neale would take out his first Brownlow medal of his career, to go along with being awarded the AFL Players Association MVP Award too. Tom Hawkins would be the 2020 Coleman medalist for a career best season for the Geelong Cats, while Fremantle's Caleb Sarong would be a judge adjudged 2020's Rising Star. But it was time for the grand final, and the two best sides over the last 2 seasons would go head-to-head in a historic night grand final at the Gabba. It started with a bang. The opening minutes saw champion Cat Gary Ablett Jr.'s farewell game threatened as he went down with a broken shoulder. While for the Tigers, Nick Vlostruen's game would be over early, suffering a brutal concussion. Ablett would return later that quarter to the match, but he was clearly hampered. The Tigers got the jump with the first 2 goals of the game, but the Cats wrangled back control of the game to lead at halftime by 15 points. Sadly for the Cats, the Tigers then jumped into gear as they so often do, booting 9 goals to 2 in the second half to seal their 3rd flag in 4 seasons. Dustin Martin would be awarded the Norm Smith Medal for his performance, which included 3 amazing goals, including the sealer. The flag win would seal Richmond as one of the greatest teams of the modern era. They did it the hard way too, being forced, like all the other Victorian teams, to spend over 100 days on the road in a quarantine hub with no home ground advantage all season. The assertion that this Richmond team would be over-reliant on their MCG advantage was now silenced forever. So that was all she wrote for the 2020 AFL season, and it was a season of firsts, a 17-round season, shortened quarters, COVID hubs, and a night grand final in Queensland. It would all end on a very familiar note, however, with Richmond being crowned champions once again. 2020 was a rough year globally, no doubt, but in a sporting context, it created so much uncertainty as to whether we would get a season in at all. It has to be said, Gil McLachlan and the AFL did an amazing job to ensure that that is exactly what happened. This season wouldn't have been possible without the tireless efforts of those involved, and of course the immense sacrifices of the clubs and their players. As you've probably heard us talk about on the channel before, COVID had its effect on the AFL YouTube scene as well. People understandably had other priorities this year, but the reduced access to footy and the fact that people couldn't actually go to games meant they kind of lost interest in the sport to some extent, and by extension, YouTube content. Now, I of course am not a victim of all this in the slightest, but I will say I am praying and hoping for a normal season in 2021. Primarily because that means that we've kept COVID at bay and the health and well-being of Australian citizens is upheld. But in addition to that, I'm sure a lot of you know by now, I'm very ambitious with this YouTube channel. 2020 definitely had its wins. I took the opportunity to really improve my craft and get better at doing what I do last year. I still have a long way to go, but at the start of 2020, things like even getting Caden and Cookson on the podcast or doing something like my Adam Simpson documentary, they seemed like pretty ambitious goals. Now those things are sitting distantly in the rearview mirror, and while maybe the bar for me is not that high, I am so much better at doing what I do now compared to where I was at the start of 2020. While the first half of 2020 definitely had a lot of wins like that, in the second half of the year, I definitely ran out of steam a little bit. It definitely wasn't the greatest of times for me in my personal life, and without wanting to be melodramatic, I was just kind of sad all the time. And when you're sad, it's hard to be creative, it's hard to be motivated, it's hard to be self-disciplined, and I was definitely none of those things. Towards the end of the footy season last year, I was just churning out half-assed footy tipping videos, and as a result, I lost my interest and my confidence in trying to make good content. I said this on the True Footy podcast at the end of last year. There was a time where I actually uploaded one of those footy tipping videos and said I was going to take a little break, and there was a point a few days after that where I thought, that could be the last video I ever make on True Footy. And during that little period that I had off from uploading, I obviously thought about things quite a lot, and bizarrely, I realized that this channel has actually become a huge part of my identity. It has literally consumed so much of my mind over the last 3 years that I don't think I would know myself without it, and as soon as I realized I didn't want to do it anymore, that just made me feel more sad. But throughout this little shitty period of my life, there were definitely some other wins. I reacquainted with an old friend, Dylan. We moved in together and we started the Coal World podcast. I also met young Druzy, who you've seen plenty of times on the channel, and quickly he's become one of my closest friends already. When you're down and out or you're depressed, the best thing that you can do is surround yourself with good people. And I'm very lucky to say that's exactly what I did. And those are 2 blokes who, if push came to shove, I know would never let me give up on myself. I think when things started to turn around and start to get a little bit better for me was around grand final day. I had a feeling that the True Footy live stream we were going to do was going to be fairly big, because last year was big, but I couldn't have predicted just how big. In both a YouTube sense and a personal sense, it's a day I'll never forget, and it felt like a win amongst what felt like an endless sea of losses at that time. A whopping 35,000 people tuned into that live stream throughout the day, and basically just tuned in to me and my mates talking about footy, watching the game, and annihilating all of the beers. But thankfully, there is some good news at the end of this whinge. I'm feeling pretty good these days. I think my head's always going to be a bit of a work in progress, but I'm feeling strong, and I'm feeling more determined than ever that I want to make True Footy my career. I'm going to be investing more time and effort than ever into the channel this year, and I'm praying for 2019 levels of growth. But hey, if it doesn't come, that's okay. I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to be determined. I'm going to work hard to make content that I'm proud of, because that's something I probably didn't uphold at times throughout 2020. It is such a cliche to use, but the reality is this is the beginning for True Footy. It has to be. I have a long way to go before I achieve what I want to achieve with this channel, but I'm going to need your help. I'm genuinely so grateful for all the support we get here at True Footy. I think a lot of you guys understand what I'm trying to build with this channel. And the truth is, I would be nothing without all of you guys. One other thing I would like to say as well is that if anyone is doing it tough out there and wants to have a chat, you can always message me. Like my mother was when she lived, I want to be someone that's going to be there for people when they need it. Even if I'm not remotely qualified for it, I'm just a message away, guys. Anyway, guys, I hope we're in for a cracking 2021, and I really hope you're along with us for the ride. Cheers.